Hello, welcome to another episode of The Set Piece brought to you by Over the Bar. As you can see, we've got a very special guest for this one lined up. Joining us is former Manchester City, Sunderland, QPR, Real Salt Lake, England under-21 international Nedum Onuoha. Welcome to Over the Bar and thanks for giving up your time, Nedum.
It's an absolute pleasure to be on, guys. How you doing?
I'm all good.
Excellent. Let's do this then. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, so obviously the main point of you being here this evening is you have got a book quite very soon. Here kicking back, so we will have the link in the show notes below. So if you just want to tell us a bit about the book, Nedum, obviously a bit about the book itself, when's it out, take it from there really.
Okay, so just to clarify, it's really weird to be on like this book press run. It feels so strange. Like and to sum me up, I've been incredibly private for the first 35 years of my life. And now on May 17th, there's going to be a book that talks all about it. You know, it's like I'm two different people, but it's a book that, you know, talks about my life, talks about my career, and not just a case of this game, that game. And it's not necessarily in chronological order, but it's about certain significant times, events and stuff in my life that led to this point here. And you know, as I was a player, I never thought about writing a book because you see books and it's like Steven Gerrard's book, it's Frank Lampard's book, that sort of thing. These are really iconic type football players. And you think sometimes they're the only stories that are justifiably sort of released. But for my own, you know, I was at City through some very interesting times. I was at QPR through some interesting times. Same for Sunderland. Same when I was in America with Real Salt Lake. And I think, as is the case with what I try and do with the media now, is to sort of give a more realistic view of what football is actually like, instead of stuff whereby we live by cliches and assume that the perspective of one person who has a platform is the same perspective for all the other people that play in the footballing pyramid, because it's not. So from that standpoint, as I say, there are tons of stories in there, tons of characters, faces, and basically they're the moments and the people who shaped me to turn me who I am today, whether it's talking about my mother, my father, my upbringing, or whether it's talking about, say, playing in that game 10 years ago where Man City won the league. You know, it covers it all. And I think overall, like, it's not seeking controversy, but it's very honest. And as a consequence, I think you might be surprised by one or two things written in there.
Yeah, and you made a good point there when you were saying about obviously some like the big like names in the game, obviously like Lampard, obviously Roy Keane's books when they came out caused a lot of controversy as well, didn't they? Because of some of the stories he was telling in there, and obviously, when from experience for myself, anyways, a lot of the better footballing books are from people you might not necessarily expect in that respect, really. Obviously, the book is coming out through Bite Back Publishing. Like I said, the link to buy the book is in the show notes below, so make sure you do check out. So we've both had a good peruse down with Paul, and it is a really good book and something to really get your teeth stuck into. But I'm going to hand over to Paul for this part of the show because I know he has a lot of questions to ask about your early upbringing. You moved to Manchester in your early years at City, so I'll let you take over, Paul.
Thanks, David. First and foremost, Nedum, I would say, you know, like David's touched on there, and as you mentioned yourself, you know, other players who perhaps during their playing careers were seen as more prominent characters, you know, not so much mouthpieces. You expect them to bring out the books, but having followed you from City and you know, growing up, I saw you make your debut and obviously say goodbye to the club. You always struck me as somebody who was one of the more articulate footballers anyway. So it's actually not a surprise to me to see that you've done a book. And I don't know if that's just because of the way maybe you came across in interviews in the past. But yeah, so it's the book hasn't disappointed me in any way. It's actually, as you mentioned there, it's given an alternative perspective that you don't necessarily get from some of the other you know, the other characters in the game as such. So it's actually, I think a lot of the things that you do cover are also very timely as well, particularly, you know, with in the latter part with, I'm sure we'll get onto with your time at Real Salt Lake as well, and some of the issues that I think that you talk about that other players have perhaps shied away from in the past.
And I think the shying away from it part is, I think that's key, because just because you don't hear something doesn't mean people don't have opinions. And as well, with the way football works, whoever has the most leverage is the person who will be spoken about in a certain manner. And as a player, like, the reality of the situation is not every player loves their manager, not every player loves said player, but the perception from the outside could be that that player or that manager is the best thing ever. So whenever you field questions about it, the answers in the question. Like I remember, so I had Harry Redknapp for a couple of years, and by the end he was good and he understood it, but at the start he wasn't. And I thought Harry Redknapp was going to be brilliant because only a few months earlier he was being linked with the England job, so we thought we've brought in one of the best managers in English football. But when you face questions about him at the time, and at this point, you know, he's training with us and we're not really getting any better. The question is, oh, it must be great for you to have somebody as experienced and as good as Harry Redknapp is, because you just have so much belief that he's going to be able to do this. He's definitely the right man, isn't he? And in that point, do you say yes or do you say no? Because if you say no, it's the most controversial thing in the world. But by saying yes, you're sort of perpetuating, you know, the belief. And at one point, by all accounts, I think he was that person that people did describe. But it's not to say that he was at that time, but for all the players. And to be fair, it was similar at City when Mancini was in there. Everyone's trying to find their feet. Everyone's just trying to like just keep their job. Nobody wants to be really open and honest, because at the end of the day, is it worth it if you want to stay at the club? If you want to be successful with the club, you don't want to upset the powers that be. So, you know, in this book itself, I've kept a lot of opinions to myself throughout my career. And I always try and be one thing which I believe is fair, because there are people who I don't like, but I also see the positives with them. And with someone like Mancini, for example, he wasn't like a villain. He wasn't like a villain, but he wasn't that nice and he wasn't that well liked by pretty much everybody. But I can tell you now, so I'm 35 years old and I left City 10 years ago. I play five-a-sides once a week. And even in those five-a-sides, I'm doing certain things which he taught me to do 10 years ago. So I can't question his effects as a coach. So I say, like, from a coaching standpoint, he was very good at getting the team to play exactly how he wanted, because I've like fully brainwashed to understand his system exactly. So I think there is a lot of that in the book where I'll tell you about the people I didn't like, but it didn't make any difference because I always try my best for every single one of them. And, you know, you can have your own opinion, but those are the realities of players working within the team. And yeah, I think there's a good level of insight within it.
Yeah, definitely. I would say Mancini is a good example because, you know, as a City fan at the time, he made wearing a scarf cool again. You know, he sort of endeared himself to the fans very, very quickly. And there was what, looking back now, seemed very much like some sort of facade that, you know, we were all taken in by him. But you hear stories, obviously it's always after the fact anyway, but you do hear things now about how things weren't so rosy. And I think the way that that you cover it in the book is a really good insight into. It might upset some City fans, it might shatter a few illusions, but I think as well you're doing it with reason, and you're giving an example of your account of it.
Yeah, I always try and be as reasonable as possible. You know, even say like I do media now, and there's certain teams and stuff that overall I don't like, but you wouldn't be able to pick that up from whatever I say about them, because I try and be as fair as possible. And if there's a positive, there's a positive. If there's a negative, there's a negative. I'm not just going to like rain on their parade and just like laugh at them when they're down, because at the end of the day, like once you've been a player, whenever the media side kicks in, you don't have a right of response when something's being discussed real time. So I'm always wary of saying something which nobody can come back to, because there's so much being said about them already. And I think there needs to be respect from that point. But Mancini he literally is a great example. But you could say that the media persona and the public image is also a part of being a manager. So for him, he was successful because he was so well liked. And when you are that well liked, people write about you differently. You know, they'll cover your failures differently. They cover your successes differently. So he played very well to that point. But from a playing standpoint, when you're just seeing it, and he's the darling, he's got his hair getting whipped back, he's got the scarf, you know, he does look $1 million. But I swear I just walked past him in the corridor and he didn't say hello. You know, there's that sort of feel. But again, in some ways, this is part of football. And as I've been trying to do with media, I'm just trying to, with the media work I've done, I'm just trying to give them an honest account of how things are. And I think from that standpoint, I think if the audience can be educated, I think we can all get along better with the game.
Yeah, absolutely. And just because it's not the Mancini hour, this is about you.
Fully not, yeah.
So let's just go and bring it back, because you mentioned education, and I know it's something that you talk about in the book as well, about how, particularly when you were growing up, a lot of people referenced your education as well. And so you started off, you know, you come to Manchester age 5, if I've got that right.
That's right. Yeah, I was from Nigeria, 5 years old.
Yeah. Moved
to Miles Platting. Still, the house which I live in is still there, still an absolute shambles of a home. But now it's sort of overlooking the Etihad, you know, where there've been some beautiful memories made and all that stuff. So I think it's in the process of maybe having that area redeveloped like they have done with Ancoats and the like. But yeah, it's just a reminder, because where I live now, to get to the stadium and to get to places over there wherever I'm working, I have to drive past that house to do it. It's always a reminder to see how far that I've come, my family have come, because we don't have to live there anymore. Whereas at that time we had to. But from an educational standpoint, you know, a few years after that, I was going to, myself, my sisters were all going to a private school, which my parents couldn't afford, but they did everything they could to give us the opportunity to do that, to sort of make something of ourselves. And as a consequence, like, we were all good at sport, but it wasn't like sport was going to be the number one thing, because my father, he had plans for all of us. One was going to be an engineer, one was going to be an accountant, one was going to be a doctor. And in Nigerian tradition, like, you don't tell them, no, you're not. This is just what you do. And it's lo and behold then, age 17, when I'm playing in the Premier League, I'm still finishing off my A-levels. And age 19, I'm doing an accountancy course, because even though like when have you made it? That's the question in football. When have you made it? And for me, it took like a couple of seasons before I could say, well, I think I've made it now. And this is going to be my career going forward. So I don't need to worry about the other side of things.
Yeah, it must be fascinating to, you know, to think and look back, and as you say, you know, Miles Platt in, you know, one of the less affluent parts of Manchester, shall we say.
Yeah.
So, you know, you then...
Generous. It's very generous. Very, very generous word in there, yeah.
Well, you know, I don't live too far from it myself, so...
Yeah.
And then obviously, you know, you went to London, you know, via the northeast for a bit as well, and then to, you know, Salt Lake, and obviously now back in Manchester. What a journey you've been on as a person. And so what I found fascinating is, if you think about, you know, life as a mosaic and all the pieces come together to make you as Nedum, you still, you know, Manchester's still very much your home, isn't it? You know, it's your heart. Do you still feel like the same kid from Miles Platt now, or do you feel...
No, thankfully not. As I was laying on the floor, slugs were just sliding past me. No, thankfully that I'm not that same person, but I do still feel very much attached to the city, because when I came over, you know, I was distinctly Nigerian, and for the first few years, we were living in a Nigerian household in Manchester. But I love the city of Manchester. That's why I remember before I went to Sunderland, like, I cried because I never wanted to leave. And then the year after going to London, like, if you're a true northerner, you sort of disrespect London. You don't even give it time of day. Say, no, I'm not going to go down there. And then to be told I have to go down there, like, the footballer's perspective from the north of going to London was, you take the train down, the Virgin train, which you'd enjoy, get on a team bus, and then sit in traffic for an hour and a half to travel 1 mile.
Yeah.
That's the perspective that you have. You don't do anything afterwards. You play the game, get on the bus, sit in traffic again, and then get the train out of there. And that's all I thought about London. In time, like, I grew to understand it, and now I understand it's like one of the best cities in the whole world, not just in the UK. So yeah, it's all the while, like, Manchester was always home. I kept this house that I'm in now. This was the second house I bought. The first one was for my family to all move into. The second one was this one, and I've had this since I think 2008. And even while I was in London for 6.5 years, and that 1 year in Sunderland, like, I kept the house. Then the 2.5 years in USA, kept the house, because I always wanted to know that this was home. And it still feels exactly the same. I had no desire to be leaving here. And as soon as, say, my career was finished, like, what a feeling it was to come back. And for me as well, I was coming back for the first time in 8 years, because I left in 2012 and arriving, in fact, it was 9 years. And then coming back in 2021, it was a case of, like, you know, I'm back, and now I've got 3 children, and I'm ready to start the rest of my life in a place that feels distinctly familiar. And no matter how long I spend away from wherever, as soon as you just arrive on the M60, or you're going down Oldham Road, or you're on Oldham Street, or you're in Piccadilly Gardens, like, it still hits exactly the same. And that feeling of familiarity as the city's getting better itself, you know, to me, that was always priceless.
Yeah, absolutely. That's quite a nice warming.
Yeah, yeah. You know, I'm a positive guy. Like, people may read the book and think otherwise, but really, I am a very, very positive guy.
I tell you what, after hearing that, though, I'm going to get the tram into town tomorrow just to smell the city air, I think.
Yeah, exactly, my friend. Exactly. You know all about those stations, all those hubs. It's a joy to be there. Yeah,
absolutely. So let's get onto the football for a bit. And first off, you know, there's so much I could ask you as a City fan, both about, you know, life as a player at City, but I want to just start off talking to you how you became, you know, indoctrinated as a Blue, you know. Because you were there for part of the time at Wembley in 1999.
Yeah. Most of the time. Don't say part of the time to try and get me in trouble. It was most of the time.
Well, I was there the whole game, and I've got the pictures to
prove it. Allegedly, yeah. I know what you said. But for me, so let me be completely honest and transparent about this. Like, I used to love football, but I didn't really align myself to a team. But this was until I got scouted when I was 9-10 years of age. And then I'm playing for City. I remember, I think I was the first sign that Jim Cassell had as the club went from a school of excellence to a centre of excellence to an academy. So I was the first person on that journey. And from then, like wearing the shirt, getting tickets to the games, being a ball boy, like you get really drawn in. I remember because I was a junior blue as well from that point. And I remember there were times when I was ball boying, and I forget what the guy in charge of was called, but he used to give me like the old programs. So I'm seeing City's programs from like the early 90s, the late 80s, seeing it where there's like times where there was one substitute, where like there was a B team playing in a separate league, all this type of stuff. And you start to learn more and more about the club, understand the history, and being at Main Road, like arriving at Main Road, everybody knows that feeling. And then being in the tunnel at Main Road as a ball boy, peering through the door and seeing the players coming out, and looking through the tunnel and seeing all the fans there and all the noise, and then being able to walk out just before them and then go to your position and watching the game from that close. Like, you know, being a fan is great as you sit in the stands, but being a ball boy, you're like you're one step away from being on the field. And it really felt like that. And the love for the club was definitely there from that point, because you could just see it all, you could feel it all. You knew what it was to be blue. You knew what it was before, the hopes, the expectations, the sadness, because it's like Division 2, all that type of stuff. But you bought into it, and you weren't buying into it because there was so much success. You bought into it because this is what it is to be a City fan. This is what it is to be blue. And looking back, like, as if you're in an academy and you really like support a club, to wear that shirt every single weekend as your team, you know, it's incredible. That shirt's the same as the shirt being worn by Ali Benarbia. It's the same as being worn by Kevin Horlock and stuff like that. And you feel an immense sense of pride every time you do it. And you are representing City against this team, against that team. You get the tracksuit same as the first team. You only train twice a week, but it's at the same place the first team used to train. Like, before you know it, you're like fully brainwashed, and I couldn't get enough of it. I was very, very proud of all those years. And to be honest, you've caught this at a good time, because I just came from the City Academy Awards, and I was giving out an award to the EDS Player of the Year, James McAtee, I think it was. And I thought, did we used to do this back in the day? And the answer was no, because everything's changed so much. Yeah. But one of my friends who was in my academy team, his son is now just signed for the under-8s. So I'm thinking, this is like full cycle. This is happening. And as I saw every one of those age groups coming up onto the stage to get their awards, there's just a big smile on my face, because I remember what that was like to be in those groups. And it was absolutely incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. We talk about not wanting to go too far from Manchester. I went to university in Manchester. I didn't want to move away from home. And for part of it was living in Fallowfield. So I used to get the 111 bus.
Yeah, that's the one. Southern Lane. Cemetery. Yeah. I know.
That's the go one. Past, and I'd think to myself, I'd get off early and have a look where Main Road used to be, and you'd feel nostalgic. And it was a special time. Yeah, sure. Obviously, you're still involved with City. You're an ambassador for City in the community, and you talk about the pride there with the awards for the kids today. So City were one of the pioneering clubs when it came to community work, actually, and I think they still are, really. Do you want to talk a bit about how, being an ambassador fits in for you, a trustee even?
Yeah, it's a trustee. Yeah. So the charity's been going for 35 years, and like one of the people that's still doing it is Alex Gibson. And I remember going to some of those City in the community schemes back in the early 90s, taking penalties against Alex Gibson. But then also when I was a boy, seeing the programs of him when he was a goalkeeper for City. So to then have the chance to go through the academy to play for the first team, finish out my career, and then be invited back into that board of trustees. We've got such diverse level of knowledge, whether it's to do with like a counselor, or Danny Wilson, who's like the chief, the managing director of the football club. And then there's me. I'm on these boards, like me as an ex-footballer, I'm on these board meetings talking about strategy and things like this. I'm like, oh, this is really, really surreal, but I love it because Manchester's my city. And I know like what it is to go to this place, because I've got friends there. I've got friends in this area. I've got friends in that area. I regularly travel around through there. I know the side streets. I know the joke, like, have you been down every street in Manchester? Like, yeah, I drive down it all the time, all that type of stuff.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And the trustees, they're very, very good. The charity's been exceptional. And the beauty is they keep wanting to get better. And they get great support by the football club, but they're not reliant upon it totally. but it just goes to show the sort of reach that you can have. And some of the things that they're doing around health, whether it's mental, physical, emotional, you know, trying to help people basically of all ages, even though there's like a real emphasis on youth. It's a great thing to be part of because it does feel good to give back. And it feels good to see the effect that you can have on people, both in the short term and in the long term, because there's so many people who've gone through the programs across years and now they're working for City, they're working for the charity and the like. So to be able to be invited to that board and to be trying to make a difference, like it's exactly what I'd want to do in retirement, because it's the type of thing which I enjoyed doing when I was a player as well.
Perfect. So let's get back, because I know obviously we've got so many things I want to ask you. You know, not much time really, I guess. But
fire away. Don't be nervous, Paul. Fire away.
So let's talk about your playing days. You know, you're on the bench. Was it 16? October 2004.
I was 17. Yeah. I was on the that story. So the way my time started was, I remember I played a game against Man United in the reserves, and we were playing at the regional athletics arena by the side of the first team stadium. And it was a big game. It was like 5,000-6,000 fans turned up for this derby game. It was like, that's prime for a reserve team game. Prime. That's really good. And I had this big battle with Kieran Richardson going head to head, like really going after each other. All this stuff it was brilliant. Like a proper Manchester derby reserve game. I think we won, and that was on a Wednesday, I think. And then I was in college on the Thursday. And then that's just state of play on £80 a week or whatever in college on a Thursday. And then I got a call from the legendary kit man that is Les Chapman, and he's asking me like, "What number do you want?" I'm thinking, for what? Like, what's he talking about? Is it like a lottery or something? But he says, "Oh, what shirt number do you want?" I said, "I don't know why." He said, "All right, I'm going to give you 16 because you're going to be on the bench for the game on the weekend." You're like, "Oh, why? What do you mean for the first team?" He said, "Yeah, for the first team, and it's against Chelsea." So I go, that's how my career started. When I was in college, getting a call that I'm going to be on the bench as Jose Mourinho's Chelsea were rolling up into town. So I did that, and I was on the bench. Nicolas Anelka scored a penalty. It was Chelsea's only loss for the whole season, I think. And it's like, wow. Because the transition from not being a professional player at the highest level to being a professional player at the highest level is truly stark, because if you're playing for the reserves, you're basically watching games on TV, just like fans are, and people who aren't that close to playing in the first team. But then all of a sudden, it's real. Like you're doing a warm-up, and you've got like Damien Duffs and Arjen Robbins and people like that just warming up by the side of you. Whereas like 24 hours earlier, I was like with my friend Stephen Mannion at Xaverian College. Like this is it. This is life. But yeah, I was on the bench for that. And then from there, I was basically in and around the first team, made the bench a couple of times, started in the League Cup against Arsenal, like the Arsenal coming off the season of being invincibles, which I was like fully invested in watching, thinking this is incredible. And all of a sudden, like there they are. Played at Highbury at the end of that season, finished with the last 9 games of the season. Like it just didn't feel real, you know, because all of a sudden, like you go from being very out to just being distinctly in, and you're just in for the foreseeable future. And it was incredible. Those first games as a professional are absolutely outstanding, and getting the chance to go and play in some of these stadiums with the full crowds, with the intensity, with learning your place within the world of football. Because once you've played a game, like nobody can ever take it away from you, even if it's just one. You've played in the Premier League, you've played against this guy, and before you know it, you start stacking up a few, and it's like, well, is this now the new normal? And yeah, it turned out that 16 years later, that's exactly what it was.
So, I mean, for me, that comes at a time where, you know, watching City we weren't great, but it was still enjoyable. And then what followed was a couple of years where it just wasn't even enjoyable under Stuart Pearce, if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
And I know you cover this period in quite a great detail in the book, and you give us a peek behind the curtain in a way that I think there'll be some City fans that are not surprised at what you say, particularly when you talk about how a certain individual perhaps manipulated the manager at the time. But I think might be best letting people read the book to get a better idea of that. But what I want to ask you is what it felt like to be in a dressing room where, you know, the team doesn't score a goal at home for 3 months or so.
It was crazy, because I think with football sometimes, you know, we can look at statistics and say this team's not won at home in 5 games, this team's not won at home in 8 games or whatever. But at times in football, you think about it in totality. So if you win away from home, you're going into the next game, you're feeling positive because you've just won a game. And you don't necessarily align all the away games and all the home games together. You're just thinking about how many points have you got. At times you sort of disregard where you got them from. Like that's why some teams have got like historically bad away records, but they don't really notice it or feel it because they still end up being all right. But in that, like, I think the best thing about that era in terms of my perspective was the fact I was young and I knew no different. So stuff was going on. You're hearing what people are saying, but again, I've been very, very respectful for the duration of my career and just the duration of my life. So I wasn't ever going to be vocal or critical about the strikers because the belief was that they would get better. Like I thought, say some people really didn't like Danny Mills when he was at City, but early doors I said, well, he's come from a World Cup, you know, he's an England international. Like he must be a good player. He'll do well. He'll get good in the end. He'll get good in the end. I think overall at City he didn't get good in the end, but that was like the positive mentality that I had about things. And for the strikers, the strikers will score. We'll be fine. This will be this. It'll be fine. But there were a lot of 0-0s, a lot of like 1-0 losses. And thinking about it, the fact that we weren't in like a true relegation dogfight is a miracle.
Yeah.
But yeah, there were some grim times, and I think come the end, the fans knew like if you come into City in April, you're not really going to be seeing any goals. And yeah, for those people that came, credit to you for staying towards the end. And as a defender, you're going out there hoping that you can get a clean sheet because the reality is you can't really rely on like scoring 1, 2, 3 goals, and also to finish that off. As a player, sometimes like people would say to me, "Oh, you must love clean sheets," and I say, "I don't really love clean sheets. I prefer the feeling of being on the field knowing that you can score goals, because if you can win games 7-6 and be happy, but a clean sheet requires a bit of luck as well. And sometimes once that you can never guarantee a clean sheet, no matter who you're playing against, because otherwise they make the goal small and the goalkeeper's bigger. But then instead, you know, we have what we have. So yeah, that feeling of having it been out there and knowing you can win a game wasn't there. And you knew that if you went 1-0 down, you're going to try really hard, but then probably walk off the field and lost 1-0. And doesn't matter whether they scored in the 5th minute or like the 85th, which was a bit of a shame back then.
Yeah, well, we were talking about a City team that at the time we played. Was it Middlesbrough? We played at home. They had 0 shots on target and we lost 1-0.
Yeah. I think that one might have actually been West Brom. Was it a Richard Dunn own goal?
I thought it was a Sunji High on goal, but
maybe the two then.
Times,
maybe the two, because I remember one where we were killing them, and then Dunny like had made a mistake and it was going towards his own goal. And I remember it was Rob Earnshaw was breaking his back to try and tap it in. Like I've never seen desperation like it to try and get on the score sheet. And he ended up not getting on it, and it was a Richard Dunn on goal. But yeah, those games they're just head scratchers. And unfortunately for a couple of years we had a ton of those.
Yeah. I don't know if they would trade those head scratchers for, you know, losing to Madrid in the semi-final. That's another kind of.
Do you know what? I feel like I don't know how old are you?
I'm 32.
Okay, so I'm just a little bit older, but there's a sense of like nostalgia that exists within City, whereby they do remember the other times, and I think in those other times they're more comfortable, probably because City were underdogs. I think the mentality of the fan base was one whereby you came along when things weren't great. So now that things are great, it feels weird because you almost like we used to hammer people for being glory seekers and stuff, and now people kind of leveling accusation at some City fans, and it doesn't suit like with the point when they fell in love with the club. Yeah. So this thing here, it's like it sounds really privileged, but it's like a tough spot to be in because everything's just too good, you know. And as a consequence, you can't really feel the true value of it because you also used to go when things weren't too good, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I want to shift it a bit away from City and talk about international football a little bit.
Yes.
If that's all right with you. I know David's got a couple of questions he wants to ask, and I've hogged the limelight a little bit here so far. So David, feel free to chip in.
Yeah, that's all good. So obviously you never end up going on to play for the England senior side. So you had a very prominent role within the England under-21 setup. When you came to that dilemma, like a bit of a crossroads in your international career, weren't there, when you were eligible to play for Nigeria, but there was a call that you didn't take at that time. So can you just tell us a bit about that call that came along? Why didn't you take it? Was there any regrets regarding that?
There are a few regrets, yeah, but it's purely because of my mentality now. And I think as you look back sometimes, you're looking back at those events thinking that you were the same person, and I'm definitely not that. And I was doing the coverage of AFCON back in January, February time, and there was so much sort of negative talk and press around that competition. And I was having to defend it because it was disrespectful, because for those guys, like, this is their national team. The same way people say it's an honor to play for England. It's an honor for somebody to play for Senegal. It's an honor for somebody to play for Mali, but it's not perceived in the same manner. And they treat the Confederation Championship like it's, it's a nuisance. And you could see that some players might not necessarily be bought or favored because the talk is they'll go away for 4 weeks in February. And I think that's disappointing. That's very, very disappointing. But that's my thought now. But back then, it was shortly after Roberto Mancini came. And this was in November, I think it was, possibly. And Bertie Volts, the then Nigeria manager, was saying that he wanted to bring me to the tournament. I spoke to him a couple of times. But I was completely out of favour at Man City. Like, completely out of it. And that's for the first proper time in my career at City. Like, there were times when I was on the bench and so on or whatever, but I knew who was ahead of me and why they were playing. But now I was completely out of it. I'd gone from playing under Mark Hughes to now, that was when Dedrick Boata came up from the reserves, and he was playing right back, and he'd never played right back in his life. But he was the next sub. He was the next person in, and I couldn't compute that. And I was worried that if I went away for those 4 weeks, when I'd come back, there'd be even less there for me. So I made a decision which favored trying to stabilize my career at City over representing like my nation. And it seems ridiculous to say now based on the person that I am, but in that moment, that's who I was, because I never left City. I never thought about leaving City. I had no interest in, that's not necessarily normal, but that's who I was. So I was just blinded by that club side and thinking, I thought I'd been drinking the Kool-Aid like everybody else and thinking that tournament was inconvenient. But the reality of the situation was, those opportunities don't come around very often. And from then, I never really got a big opportunity like that again, regardless of however I was playing. And I was seeing people play for Nigeria who were playing in lower divisions than me, and people who weren't really playing for their clubs and the like. But I never got the call again. And, the feeling was back in Nigeria among some that, like, I'd turned my back on the nation to try and beg to play for England, which was never a thing. But, perception matters. And that's why in the end, I never got the call again.
Yeah, you made a good point. It's something I've always maintained about the African nations, especially when it comes to AFCON and especially the World Cup as well. The way the African Cup of Nations is perceived, and when it comes to the World Cup draw, it feels like the African teams are amongst the minority of football fans, they're there to make up numbers and things like that. It's ultimately very disrespectful towards there's some great footballing nations. Obviously Ghana, World Cup semi-finalists not so long ago. Nigeria also was put in real performances, Cameroon, Senegal. So there is a lot of quality in that region, isn't there?
There is, and to be honest, you've reminded me of a point, and I only really realized this from covering the qualifiers as well. So only 4 teams from the continent make it to the World Cup, but 13 make it from Europe. But Europe has maybe 1 or 2 more countries in it in their sort of footballing federation than, say, Africa does. So to get into the World Cup from the continent of Africa, you have to win your group to then enter a playoff. So all the playoffs are between 8 group winners. That seems so hostile. And, you say, well, someone was making the argument that, historically, the European teams do better. But I'd argue they do better because there are more of them there. They're making up, I think it's 40 to 45% of all the teams that are at the World Cup. So you're going to be in with a respectable chance, especially when you get the chance to do it every 4 years and have done historically for a long time. So that plays into it, another African team's failed. Well, yeah, maybe if there were more. And ultimately as well, for the 13 Europeans, 13 European nations can't all do well at a World Cup, because after a group stage, we have the round of 16, and after 16, we're down to 8. And you're not going to find 8 European nations in there. So the majority of them have gone missing, even though they might have made it out of the group. And I wouldn't say that all those nations who qualify are just looking to make it to the round of 16. So I think that's been misguided as such in terms of how many positions they get. But the powers that be aren't going to be saying, tell you what, let's take some away from Europe and just give it to other people. Because at the end of the day, the power sources in there are very significant, aren't they?
Yeah, when you put it like that, it's almost a little bit like the World Cup is run in the same way Super League was supposed to run.
Hey, can I just let me add something to that as well? Because Like, I don't. There are so doing the media and stuff that I do. There are tons of perfectly reasonable people, and then there are people who are like really, really like love City, like simping on City all the time. And then there are people who hate City, and some of those people who hate City, they're like praising Real Madrid, and I'm pretty sure Real Madrid are still trying to do the Super League. I'm pretty sure they still are. So, you know, where were these emotions that you had last year when Florentino Perez is a disgrace, is this, is that? It's a masterclass. Real Madrid do it again. They're the best thing since sliced bread. You know, just put a little bit of perspective in there, please, guys.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And just to go back to the point about the African nations, I didn't, again, once he made that point, I didn't realize how heavily saturated it was, like in terms of the figures. But when you watch the World Cup draw, it becomes a bit of a minefield, don't it, when they come out with like permutations. Like, but there's great African teams, like obviously Egypt being the prime example, that are going to miss out on this year's World Cup, aren't they? So you miss players like Mo Salah at a World Cup for, I don't want to see use the term European whipping boys, but I think we'd much rather see a team like Egypt there than a European minnow.
I think the fact like they're bringing more teams next year is a step, but like let's be clear. So if you're an African nation, you've won your group, you could then draw the 2 playoff games, but lose on penalties and not go to the World Cup. You know, like what are we doing? But then, as I say, most people aren't going to be arguing the case for it because they want their nation to qualify anyway. You know, someone wants to see Wales, Ukraine, or Scotland at the next World Cup, and that's fair enough. But then also, I'd argue whoever comes out of that sort of like bracket or so on, what are their expectations going into the World Cup? Because I remember last year rather, like Scotland nearly made out of the group, but the game which they celebrate the most was a 0-0 draw of England. Like they hadn't scored within the first 2 games, and that's a significant result for them. But then again, in the grand scheme of things, like say from a World Cup standpoint, if that's what the standard is and that's what you're hoping for, then surely someone else hoping for the same thing that maybe is 1 more games to be able to qualify, maybe they could just be in that exact same spot as well.
Yeah, I completely agree on that point. There's a question I've got for you regarding that international football, which you might be able to shed some light on, because we've talked about the fact that you're eligible to play for England and for Nigeria. And obviously, there's quite a few well-publicized cases of like players who have split nationalities and debate which countries play for. I think the more recent example is Wilfried Zaha, where he had the call for England here and going playing for the Ivory Coast. So at a younger age, like as a player who does have that dual nationality, like what is the thinking behind like when you're pledging allegiance to going on to represent that country? Is like a thought process behind it, or is it? You could shed some light on that.
I think it depends on the person, but ultimately, a lot of the nations, say within the continent of Africa, they're not quite structured in the same way like the FA are. So with England under 21s, as I was playing through the youth system and all that, and then I was playing for City, like I wasn't thinking about playing national team football. But then one day I got to the training ground and there was a letter on reception that said you've been called up and you'll be picked up in this car after this game and taken to play in this and do that. Like bang, that's what it is. It wasn't a consent form saying you can please take this to your parents and say, do you want to play for England or whatever? It's like, it's there. This is what it is. And you understand why you're in the country, the sort of how prestigious it is to be called up like that and to have the chance to play. Very rarely do people have 2 letters on that desk saying one's from, say, Nigeria and one's from England. And I think England are better at sort of finding out young talent that can play for them. So they get them in the system far quicker, especially because the teams are more accessible. You're talking about players who play for like major clubs in major leagues, whether it's like Arsenal in the Premier League, or even just like say youth level football, like the Premier League 2 or EDS and stuff like that. So everybody knows, everybody's in the system. Whereas I think some of the other nations, the investment's not necessarily there. So they're not really looking to find out who's who and who's doing what. Like after I missed a chance to play in 2009, I think it was, or 2010, I had another chance further down the line. And the reason it was coming was because somebody, when I was in Sunderland, contacted me and said, I know this person who works in the Nigerian FA. And if you speak with me and say you want to do it, I will speak with them and they will call you. Can you imagine the equivalent now for England? Like there's a postman that sees you every morning and it says, I'll tell you what, I know Gareth Southgate. So if you want to play for him, I'll get in touch and we'll do that. So, in some ways the structure is nowhere near as, say, complete as, say, England's is and other nations within Europe. So I think it's very easy. You tend to find it that somebody goes from playing for England to playing for another nation, because that, you know, in terms of identifying young talent, England are very, very good at that. And they bring you on board. And, you know, it seems like an easy decision at the time, because essentially, like, here's the letter, here's the car waiting for you outside, and off we go. Because you're being acknowledged for being a really good player in the English domestic league. I don't know if they're as good in terms of identifying foreign English talent that's playing abroad, but in England they're like magnificent with it and far better than some of those other nations. So then you play for the 21s, you're in the system, but then, you know, the way England works is saturation. Like, there are tons of really, really good players that could play for the national team, but there are people who are ahead of you and they're not just going to go away. So then, you know, it's been a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. Like, who's to say that you will ever get a call up for that national team? And then that's when some of the other nations have really identified it and they're offering something to you. Hey, here's your chance. Here's your chance. You could play. You could play at a World Cup. You could play at these Confederation Championships. You'll be the king. You'll be the most exciting player in the nation and stuff like this. And it's very easy at that point to say, yeah, absolutely want to do it, because, you know, you don't have hopes of playing for England when, you know, you could play as well as you are doing domestically and you're not getting a call anyway. You know, you can read the room and know what's what ultimately.
Yeah. No, it's insight I've always been like interested in. Obviously, there's like quite a lot of like well publicized ones, like the Zaha, obviously Grealish and Rice made the switch, didn't they, from the Republic of Ireland to England, and it's what the process was behind that. But just to kind of like continue the focus on the international setup, so he did play quite a lot for the England under 21s. In terms of your development through in that under 21 period, so how did you find playing? Like, it was a level below, obviously, the senior side. So how did you find playing in that under 21 setup?
Yeah, it was actually really enjoyable. And I remember the first time I went, like the people who I went with initially, like I'm 35 years old, but the people I went with that first time, some of the people there are now like 41 years of age. That's how long ago it was. I was basically played in 3 cycles. I played in the cycle of people who were like 1982. Then I did the 1984s, and then my age group was 86s. And yeah, it was really good because you're playing with so many familiar faces. Like, if you never play for a national team, you basically play with your squad and that's it. But now here's that chance to learn about other teams, other players, you know, how they do things at Chelsea, how they do things at Charlton, how they do things, you know, Middlesbrough and stuff like that. And a new sort of coach and different sort of mentality, because this is elite men's football, but it's got that sort of like age handicap to it. And there were some players who, you know, had made their debut, like myself, at 17, and now here they're like 21, 22 years of age, because I know you can be 23 by the time the tournament comes. So they're really experienced Premier League players and people who've been in that cycle for a while. And it was really good to test yourself in and amongst those players, firstly, because I was never somebody that got called into like Lilleshall, like the old England groups or something. I never got called into England youth setups in general, even though my academy team was one of the best in the land. There was nobody getting called up. But so, yeah, to get into that was great acknowledgement. And then you played against foreign opposition. And that was a good test, traveling all around Europe doing it. It was really, really good. And overall, and I stress overall, I really enjoyed it because I had some great experiences. And say, the first time I did it, I remember Peter Whittingham, who's passed now, he was playing left back against France. And there was this guy who was playing for France. He looked really ugly. He was like, oh, who's this guy? Oh, it's Frank Ribery. So then the second game, I had to play left back because he was giving Peter like such a tough time. So we didn't make it in that one. Then the next year, we're playing in Holland, and looking back, there were some very, very naughty players playing for some of those teams there. And then 2 years later, we're in Sweden, and we're playing against the Germans in the final against like Manuel Neuer, Mats Hummels, you've got Ozil, you've got Kadiras, you've got all these players playing in the side. And like, what a test that is, you know, when you look back. And that's the same age group that had this, say, people like Sergio Ramos and Gerard Piqué and all that, they're the same age group as me. So when you ever get the chance to play against people like that, you realize like that's the standard across Europe. These are some of the most consequential players in Europe through that time. So to get the chance to be involved in that setup with the best talent in England, well, subjectively the best talent in England for that age group, and then to go and play some of those other nations in some of those stadiums and in those contexts of European championships and the like, it was incredible.
Yeah, obviously came through a bit of a golden generation period in terms of like youth level football there. Obviously, whilst representing under 21s, it kind of provided a bit of a low point of your career, obviously, in 2007 against Serbia. Obviously, the racism was coming from the section of the Serbian support. So at that time, was that like your first experience of racism at like a more senior level? And how did you feel at that time? How did you handle that?
I think it probably was in senior level football. I'd experienced some stuff in the academy when I traveled abroad to like Italy and Switzerland and stuff. Like I've seen swastikas and stuff outside stadiums, all that type of jazz, and players who don't speak English, but then the words that they know are like deeply offensive words, so they'll just bark that at you privately. So yeah, and in that game, it was surreal because I thought, did I just hear monkey noises? And it sounded like a few people. Then you turn around and a few people turns to a few more as they then gather together because now you're looking at them. And it just felt really surreal. And to be honest, it was so surreal. I can't really remember what even happened like next for the next minute or so because you're just confused. Like, is this happening? I think there was a sound on the tannoy that said, don't be racist or whatever. UEFA's against racism. Lo and behold, UEFA doing everything they can to try and stop it. But yeah, looking back at if I was the person I am today back then I think I'll walk off the field and get them out of the stadium because there's no place for football within football society for stuff like that. For people to think that's okay, it's not right. So I think I would have reacted differently if I was the person I am today. But in the end, it's just a shock, and that's one of the things about racism and like significant abuse. It always comes when you least expect it, and when it's like that, how you react is never something you can plan because it literally just drops your jaw on the floor. And overall, you just hope that you don't do anything that'll get you into trouble in the end.
Yeah, and so you kind of gone into the point I wanted to bring up next in terms of like how different authorities are currently handling racism within the game. Obviously, you mentioned your way there, who I think, to put it politely, do an absolutely shambles of a job trying to get on top of that. Just to kind of the context is the infamous Nicholas Bentner getting a heavier fine for wearing paddy power underpants than Bulgaria got for the race abuse towards England players a few years ago. And so in terms of like the current state of the game, so how do you feel like we'll focus on like UEFA first and foremost. How do you feel like they're like tackling the issue at the moment?
I don't think they're really tackling it as such. I think, I take that back. So they're doing, in my opinion, the bare minimum. But the bare minimum is still more than nothing. So they can all pat each other on the back and say, we're doing a great job. And as you were saying about that paddy power thing, like whenever it's to do with sponsorship or money, they come down so heavily. Like cash is king. Like look at a year ago, like everyone thought they knew football. And then a few teams threatened to go and do a Super League, and UEFA started putting in new rules, which you'd never even heard of before. We'll remove you from competition. We'll do this. We'll do that. Every threat under the sun. And we didn't even know they had these powers, but they only brought them out because of the thing that bothers them the most, which is them potentially losing an asset or two and losing lots of money. But then when it comes down to racism, okay, we'll fine you £10,000 and you can be banned for like 5 games or whatever. I guarantee if they came down harder, people wouldn't be doing it. But when there's no real consequence, or the consequence is just so small, at the end of the day, like it's not going to change anything. People need to know it's unacceptable. They really need to know. But until they're like truly vilified, that won't be the case. And I think the way that UEFA are, no one's ever vilified. Like it's 2022. People know what's what. And if they don't, like, have they just arrived here in a time machine from 50, 60 years ago? It doesn't add up to me. So I think in terms of UEFA, they'll say UEFA says no to racism on TV adverts and stuff like that. But the fact is, you got to judge them according to their actions, not their branding, because they think they get their branding right. But the reality is nobody believes in them, nobody trusts them. And lo and behold, we keep having issues, and we probably will do for most of our lifetimes, I'd say.
Yeah, I know from like my perspective, it just feels like they're empty gestures and it's like a box ticking exercise from UEFA just to see like they are doing something. But obviously, you've experienced football on both sides of the globe in terms of England and obviously the MLS as well. So kind of want to touch on the MLS because obviously you were in America at the time in the rise of the Black Lives Matter protests. So how did that impact you whilst you were obviously playing for Salt Lake, and how did the reception, like in terms of protests whilst you were playing, so how was it over there at the time to experience that?
So the USA is like, it's truly incredible country, but then also incredibly confusing as well. And it can be very, very divided over certain issues. So when you're over there, like this, they say, don't talk about politics, don't talk about this, don't talk about that. And I understand why, because like it's almost like it's just about teams. Are you a Republican or you're a Democrat? Because if you say like you believe in healthcare for everyone, and it's like, oh, you're a Democrat, almost like it's an insult. Or, you know, if you walk around with a flag bandana, well, you're a Republican. You know, that's the identity thing that goes on. And with what happened to George Floyd, you would have thought everyone would get behind something, but again, something like that split the country, because for some they were saying, "Oh, what did he do? What did he do? Maybe he deserved it." But like, you're watching somebody get murdered, it's like, "Oh, what did he do?" And then the protests start to happen because people have had enough, and people say, "Oh, look at these people! They're destroying our buildings. They need to respect our buildings." I'm like, this is weird. This is really, really weird. And I think, given the fact that I couldn't vote that year, you could take in everything that was going on, and then not, whether it's whichever side it's coming from, and then not really be definitive about your opinion or not have to share it, because at the end of the day, there's no point taking the team because you've got no say in the game anyway. But it did make me realize, like, fundamentally, certain things are just incredibly flawed. Like the Constitution, the First Amendment, I think, is the right to free speech. And one of the things within it, because I felt this in the long term, and just bear with me here, is like, one of the protections is that you're allowed to burn an American flag, because it's freedom of speech, and it's one of the specific sort of things within it. I dare anybody to do that in the USA. I dare anybody to do it, even though a lot of Republican minds believe in the Constitution and they will fight to the bitter end for it, as is the same with peaceful protest, which is kneeling. But the people who kneel get called un-American, even though the thing that they're doing is literally something which comes from the Constitution. So you're trapped in this position now where you want to try and make a stand or make a statement, but if you kneel, you get booed. But you're getting booed by people who believe in the Constitution, but they don't believe in you because now they think you're un-American. And as a consequence, like, you face a lot of criticisms for trying to do something that goes beyond sport. And people say, "Oh, just stick to sport. Just stick to sport." But then in the same breath, like, I'm also a human being and I see the world. I live in the real world. I don't just live on the field for 90 minutes and then I just go and get buried underground. I know lots of people that were like that. And it was a tough point because, again, the country was divided. People calling people un-American, they're a disgrace, they're this, leave the country, all that type of jazz. And it was wild. It was wild, but still, did stuff change? Maybe there were more people that were understanding sort of opinions. And when I was with my teammates at Salt Lake, everybody was of a different political party, but they all knelt because they believed in the cause. But the downside is you couldn't then transfer that to the audience. And as a consequence, lots of people were booing, lots of people were unhappy with how you were treating it. So it was a very, very strange experience, seeing protest and then counter protest, seeing things which feel objectively wrong, but then some people were saying it was right, you know, whether it was a Kenosha shooting or something like this. So I took it all in because I had to, and I was just making sure that my family was safe. And when the time was coming to leave, like, there are tons of people who I miss from over in the USA, but there were tons of people I'm glad that I'll never see again. It was an experience. It taught me lots of lessons. And I appreciate tons of different perspectives anyway, but I don't necessarily agree with all of them. But I'm going to be going from that point forward, making a stand for what I believe in. And, you know, if people don't want to listen to what I'm saying, that's fair enough, but I'm still going to make the stand nonetheless. And I think some of that came from being in the USA in 2020 for sure.
Yeah, it's really well put, that. In terms of being back in...
Follow up on that. Sorry to interrupt, David. Yeah. There's just one thing, though, that, like, when I was reading through the book, and you talk about, you give the example of when you were putting your bins out.
Yeah.
And, you know, the things you're saying there, I know Manchester might not be perfect in everyone's minds, but for somebody who grew up in a city that is as diverse as ours, and, you know, the things that you explain and the feelings that you talk about from when you were in the US, it's just really difficult to comprehend. And obviously, you know, as a white person as well, it's difficult for me to comprehend. But, like, it just, the culture, just it's such a dramatic shift from, you know.
It's very different. We speak the same language, but the views on life are completely different. Like tons of people in the USA will never leave the USA because they believe USA is the best country in the world, and as a consequence, there's no reason to go anywhere else. But then within the USA as well, each state is different. I think sometimes we try and view it as one country, but you should view it state to state because depending on where you go, could define the experience that you have. You know, even with say some of the Supreme Court stuff that's going on in a minute and the potential for Roe v. Wade to be struck off and so on. There's a governor in Arkansas, I think it's Arkansas, which should totally be Arkansas, by the way, in Arkansas, which says, you know, there'll be no abortions in our state, period. But then in a more progressive or left-leaning state, then, you know, they'll be providing stuff to help people have the choice, you know. And the branding is here. Even during COVID times, Florida never really did anything. But then in New York, you could do nothing without significant legislation, you know, about, say, protecting people. So it literally depends on where you are. But one thing is for sure, the Constitution rides within all those states. And again, in the UK, like, I'll be completely honest with you, like, I don't have a great relationship with, say, police in general, but that's purely because it affects my life in a negative way for the duration. But overall, like, you don't necessarily fear them, but in the US, you fear them. Because if everyone's got the right to bear arms, then all the police officers have to as well. So then you're thinking, like, here's this person who I don't know. I don't have a great relationship with them, and they have this. And again, like, I don't have a problem with police as a concept, but they're just normal people, but they have more authority. So if I'm having issues with normal people, then why would someone with a normal person with authority make me feel comfortable, you know? And in the USA, that's like prevalent everywhere, especially when you see how divided the country can be over certain issues. Because I'd say, like, again, I'm going down a bit of a hole here, but for some people, like, some of the discrimination bias is very subconscious. So when somebody, not everyone, maybe it's a minority, but it's still one person too many, even if it's just one. You ask them, why do you want to be a police officer? They say, I want to make a difference. And say, oh, what's that? Because I'm worried about my community and I want to try and help them out and protect them from people. And I say, what people do you want to protect them from? And then there's like a silence because the person trying to protect somebody from looks a certain way or feels a certain way, because that's the sort of subconscious bias that exists. And when that's the case, then as you're walking down the street in an affluent area, are they thinking, should this person be here? Like, one of my friends, he played for the college American football team there. So he's playing in front of 40, 50,000 people. And he finished the game and was driving to his house in a nice area called Cottonwood Heights. And police followed him all the way to where he was because they believed that he shouldn't be there. And he's thinking, like, why? But the guy said, well, you know, it's late at night. It's this, that, and the other. And it's like, well, okay. But yeah, anyway, sorry, I went down a rabbit hole then. I apologize.
Don't apologize. It's 2022 and we're still having to have conversations like this. So,
yeah,
you know. Anyway, sorry to interrupt you, David. I know you had another.
No, it's all good, don't worry. Kind of touched on it a bit earlier, but it's just like, obviously you had that spell in America for 2 years. You've come back, and obviously things are very different in terms of like the Premier League and things like that. But in terms of like the MLS, the Premier League, do you feel like the Premier League are doing a much better job or have got a better grip on things? And same like the FL and things like that. I think they've got a better grip on what is happening in terms of the racism issue, or do you think they should still be doing a lot more as well?
I think they could be doing a lot more, but I feel like they're more receptive to it. I think ultimately, like in the USA, you know, we can talk about the MLS and so on, but MLS is like one of the smallest sports in the country. You've got NFL, you've got the NBA, you've got Major League Baseball, then you've got the college version of football, college version of basketball, and so on. Like, they're the big money makers. And for some of those, they're very, very conservative sports overall. So they don't really they don't want to see change. So if you empower the players and the clubs to try and make statements, like, there's immediate pushback. Like, let's be clear, it was 4 or 5 years ago when Colin Kaepernick wasn't allowed back in the NFL. Like, he was literally blackballed. Think of that concept now where somebody tries to make a stand about something that's going on, and then as a consequence, all the people decide that nobody's allowed to hire him. That is bonkers. It's literally bonkers. So I think the UK in general, in terms of the way that they sort of cover sport, they can be more sort of fluid with it, because it's not really as set in its ways as, say, other places are in America and other sports are in America, and they have their traditions and they want to stand by them. Because again, like, to slightly change the topic, over there. So have you heard about the NCAA and how that all works? Like up until last year, these athletes, college athletes, they'd be playing in front of 50 to 100,000 fans every week, getting covered on TV for 10, 12 hours a day. They've got their own TV networks and all sorts. These are huge games. These are some of the biggest arenas in the USA. But there are tons of people who are adamant the players shouldn't be paid, even though like people bet millions and billions upon the sports that they do. And then when someone says, "Oh, you should totally pay them," says, "No, they should just be happy to represent the school." So, you know, when you have that sort of like mentality, which is basically entrenched within the sport itself, you know, change is going to be very, very hard to come by. So, yeah, I think the UK is doing a better job. You can always still do more, but I think overall it's probably looking to do more because it's listening to more people now and getting a real check in terms of what is actually going on, as opposed to just like say what UEFA do, where you do one thing, then everyone just pats each other on the back.
Yeah, definitely. Like you said there earlier on about the media coverage of it as well. Obviously, the media could be doing a lot more to help influence that as well. But obviously, it's a huge cultural change in it as opposed to more than anything really into it. So obviously, you've now got all the media work, BBC, ESPN, you've got a really successful podcast as well. Is that how you see post-retirement now for the immediate future, or is there any like plans to? Do you have the itch to go into any form of coaching or anything like that, or is it just purely media work?
That's funny. You were doing really well then until you said coaching. Like, no, I don't want to do coaching. Like, I was at this event that was at earlier, the academy one. They were showing how the under 18s have all got their like UEFA C license type thing. And I remember doing mine when I was in the academy, but I made sure to never do anything more because I never wanted to be a coach. There's no conversation about getting into coaching. I didn't do it in my 30s. I've got no interest because I want to like separate myself away from like that footballing calendar and the standards that are involved. Like, this is it now. You go with the flow of it. And off the back of that, I don't necessarily want to be doing media to the point where I enter that schedule again, where I'm always at a game at the weekend, always at a game in midweek. I value my free time. I value my time with my family. I value the chance to be able to receive a text from, say, ESPN and say, "Can you do this day?" And I can just say yes or no. I don't have to be there. And I think obviously you can be in that position when you've made enough money and you've looked after yourself and stuff, which I have, which I'm very, very grateful for. And I know that's not the norm, but I plan to make the most of that. Like even next week, the final weekend of the season, the most important weekend potentially of the recent times, I got text from someone from the BBC saying, "Can you come in on this day because it's significant?" I was like, "Well, I can't because it's my anniversary of my wife, so I'm taking her away to Italy." Like, that's who I am. So the immediate future does feature me being on ESPN, BBC, doing stuff for the Athletic, working for City and the like, but it's always going to be a hobby because the most important thing to me is life, and I plan to live it as much as humanly possible.
Yeah. So let's just try and end like on a. I mean, we've covered some pretty deep topics and you know, and crammed a lot in. So let's try and end something a bit more positive. So I can remember Birmingham City at home. You scored 2 goals, or so I thought.
Yeah, one got taken away. That's right. Yeah, and that was frustrating.
Go on. No,
go on.
After
you. Go on. Don't.
I was going to say, like the second one that you that wasn't the header.
Yeah.
To me, it kind of looked like you bundled into the box, right? And I've not seen that goal back since I saw it live in the stadium because I can't find it on YouTube.
Yeah, it's vanished. Rightly so.
But then I have also seen the goal that you scored at Stamford Bridge for Sunderland.
Yes.
I'm kind of thinking maybe he didn't stumble. Maybe he just has a good, you know.
Okay. Let me explain to you who I am as a player, or who I was as a player. Yeah. Trusted by 99% of all the players I played with. If you ever did like a thing where you pick 3 captains and pick teams, always in the top half, regularly in the top quarter, like might not be first pick, but I'm going to be one of the key picks. Yeah. And it's because of stuff which you wouldn't necessarily see on a Saturday. But that goal against Birmingham, I tried to play a ball to Adebayor, and it was one of the worst balls I've ever played. But I instinctively knew it was terrible the moment it left my foot, so I actually ran onto it. And then I scored a goal with my left foot from outside of the box into the bottom corner. And it was just fluid. It's just what it was, just reacted to it. But that's not like a million miles away for some of the goals that I used to score in training. Like, I can do that. I can score goals. Like I say, I just never really did it on a Saturday. So they're like 2 worlds. People knew me from like, you know, behind closed doors, and they knew me for, and playing in front of 40,000 fans. But then the Chelsea one, again, like I'd scored like goals like that in training before. Like it's not impossible, but to do it at the Bridge, to do that as the first goal Chelsea has conceded at home that whole season, to do it against them who I think they might have been champions. It was incredible. And the only regret I have, and to be fair, I have very few regrets overall in my career, but one that I do have is the fact I was so tired that I couldn't celebrate the goal properly. You know, to win 3-0 at Stamford Bridge and you score a goal like that, like just before half time, I couldn't breathe. Otherwise, I would have just gone bonkers, jumped in the air, done something. But instead, I just tried to style it off like everything was normal. Yeah, like, you know, just scored at the Bridge, you know, little mazy run and bottom corner finish against Peter Cech. Nothing to see here, guys. Just a regular day.
There's one other thing I've got to ask you that I heard this story in Mary D's, so it's probably not true.
Go
on. Were you, when you were younger, were you on Blue Peter or on Northwest Tonight as being like the fastest runner?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I've done a segment on Blue Peter, which I was incredibly proud of. And also, speaking of like BBC type shows, I was on Match of the Day too, like a couple of months ago. That was surreal. Sitting on the chairs, the music started playing. Thought, oh god, I really have made it. But yeah, I used to be pretty fast, to be fair. So I was second in the nationals when I was under 15 and fourth in under 16, basically. So I was 14 and 15 years of age, and yeah, I had a bit about me. Yeah, I was not too bad, if that makes sense.
No, I genuinely, because I heard it in Mary D's, I didn't know if it was.
No, it's true.
So just a quick fire thing then. So obviously the forward of the book is Joe Hart and Michael Richards, who everybody knows and everybody who's a City fan loves. So
yeah,
would you say they're your two best friends in football, or would you say that they're just two of the best talkers of your friends in football?
With the book, it's interesting that because they're very good friends of mine, especially I'd say more so Joe, because I spent more time with Joe through the years, but I'm still really close to Micah. But they're probably two of the more visible ones. Like I'm really good friends with Fraser Campbell, really good friends with Junior Hoylett. There are a few people in USA as well, but like it's Micah Richards and Joe Hart. And those two really bounce off each other very well. So in terms of people who know each other, the two of them coming together, like they're clowns, the pair of them. So they would do a good job because it would be entertaining. But yeah, I'm very close with them. And to be honest, I'm close with a lot of people. Well, not a lot of people, but I've had tons of teammates, tons of acquaintances, and I'm always happy to see them. But there are certain people who I'm friends with still to this day because I like them for who they were away from the field as well. And I always anticipate at this point where I'd be retired and be able to have a normal life. And with guys like that, we don't need to turn up in our game shirts and say, oh, we did this and we did that. We can turn up and not talk about football. We can talk about family. We can talk about places we want to go, things we want to see, and so on and so forth. And we used to do that when we were younger, and we're still doing that now. So yeah, I'm very close to those two. And I'm very grateful that they did that on the book for me because it, adds a little bit of a spark to the front cover for sure.
Yeah, it's an interesting.
They're wild, yeah. I know they're wild, mate. They're wild. If you know, I know what they're like, so I get it, and I hope other people get it as well, and don't take it the wrong way.
What's your favorite moment as a fan, and what's your favorite moment as a player?
My favorite moment as a fan, I think I'm not going to do a full game. So. But it was the Champions League final before the game started. Being in Porto with Man City, I was working for Man City in the fan zone, sunny for a Champions League final. I never in all my life thought I would be there because City don't do Champions League. Yet still there they were, and people coming up to me saying, "Oh, let's take a picture. How you doing?" And all this, like. After you leave, there's this thing in the back of your mind that people forget you, but the City fans, they don't forget you.
No,
and they're always happy to see you. So that I felt incredibly proud to be there, working for the club, which I love, and to be around people who have a fond memory of me. And I was about to witness something which was incredible. In some ways, it was to see them in a final. Obviously, the result and the performance wasn't what City wanted, but. I'll never forget that day because it was just a privilege from start to finish to be invited to be over there on behalf of the football club.
Yeah, do you know, it's funny you mentioned that because I was going to mention this off air to you. My sister was one of the people that came up and asked for a picture. And she just wanted, my sister, she wanted me to say, tell him I said thank you.
Yeah, it's little things like that. Like it melts your heart. Like I left City 10 years ago, but it just melts my heart, mate. Honestly, it's incredible.
And that day as well, I know you had your hands full dealing with Kevin Horlock, who indulged himself in the beverages.
Yeah, I don't think he remembers the full 24 hours of that day, to be honest with you. But you know, it is what it is.
Yeah, it was good spirits there. It was nice. That was before, but can black out the game and just forget.
So I forgot as well. So that was as a fan. I forgot as a player. If I'm to keep it blue, I would have to say when the final whistle went at Old Trafford in 2008, after we'd done a double over them, and that was the first during that is like the Munich disaster memorial type game, and essentially we were just there to make up the numbers as United would win the game in limited edition kits, and they'll like mourn people afterwards and all that. But then somehow we won and you look at the team that won there and did the double, like that should never be a thing. You know what I mean? We should never have won that. But still, we won it, and Stephen Ireland was incredible. You know, Benjani got his goal, Darius Vassell got his goal, and I'm not sure if I said this in the book, but Darius, to that point, every time he scored, he never lost. Yeah. And I knew that. Yeah, I did. Yeah, Stephen Ireland knew that. So when you're looking at each other in the dressing room at half time after Darius has scored in the first half at Old Trafford, you're like, isn't this interesting? I wonder if this is going to carry on. And thankfully it did. And it brought an incredible moment to be able to walk off the field at Old Trafford with nobody there but City fans and one very disgruntled United fan who ran all the way across to give us some stick. Felt immensely proud that guy felt the need to do just that. So yeah, that was a high point for me.
Brilliant. It's a day everyone who's on the blue half remembers at least.
Yeah, for sure.
And can I ask, you mentioned there we're wearing a special kit. Do you have a particular item that you've accumulated over your career that you cherish?
That there is a good question. I've never really thought about that before. The shirt which I wish I had still, and I'm sure it's something maybe at my dad's house, the blue Kappa tracksuit with the burgundy like Kappa sign going down the side. That tracksuit there, yeah. I really love that because I also remember wearing that Kappa kit. It was way too small. It was extra tight and all that stuff. But I feel like that's like a very like Kappa as a sponsor it's just nuts. Like mid to late 90s Kappa is just weird, but I loved it. And then maybe that first, there's the kit when Robinho first came. It was that bright orange Lecoq Sportif kit that didn't fit anybody. Like that's significant because how can one of the quote unquote richest clubs in the world be wearing this as they travel around Europe? And then I really like the Umbro like heritage kits when they came back in like 2009, I think it was, under Mark Hughes. Like those kits were clean, and I've got quite a few of those shirts upstairs, and I enjoyed wearing them because it felt like City. That's when things were turning, and they were going to be taken more seriously because Umbro really aligned themselves with the club and with the team. And yeah, that I'd say those are my key ones, really.
Yeah. The Umbro shirt, beautiful. The Lecoq Sportif you mentioned, yeah, it wasn't even that popular at the time.
Disaster, mate. Imagine Robinho's wearing a shirt that was 5 sizes too big for him. Like, unbelievable.
And final one, I guess you kind of probably answered it because you mentioned Porto, but what is your favourite moment since retiring? Or your favourite thing since retiring?
Yeah, the Champions League final was definitely a key one. And do you know what? My favourite thing really, I'll do in 2 parts. Away from football, it's being back home and seeing all my friends and family again. You know, I really miss them. Didn't get a chance to see them much in 2020 because there was no travel allowed in the USA and the like. But I'm really glad that I'm welcome back to Man City, a place where, and my love for the club is back to what it was before I was really a player. And people are so nice, and the club is enormous now in terms of staff and belief and all that stuff, but there's still so many familiar faces, and every time you see them, they're delighted to see you, and it feels like the old times. So that sense of familiarity still exists, and I feel proud, as I say, to be asked every time they ask me to go and do work for them. I was like, absolutely. I feel proud to be a trustee for the charity. I feel like Manchester's my home, and Man City have welcomed me back as well. So with that, like, I'm absolutely ecstatic. And obviously lots of people hate City and all that jazz, but deep down, I don't care because it's a club that's like in my heart. And to be welcomed back is very important to me.
Just before, obviously, we do the final wrap up, just want to give us a bit of another reminder about Kicking Back, where we can find that next week when it's released.
Yeah, Kicking Back is available May 17th. I think a lot of people have gone to Amazon, but it's on WH Smith, so it's probably best to just give it a Google, give it an order, give it a read, and then give it a thumbs up. And as is the case with most things YouTube as well for this show, like and subscribe, and don't forget to ring the bell wherever that is, so you don't miss out on anything.
What a professional.
I'm a YouTube guy, as you can see.
Brilliant.
Yeah, he's saving us a job. But yeah, all the details will be in the show notes, video descriptions, and the sort. So make sure you do click on link below and check the book out. It's a really, really honest autobiography. Yes, make sure you do check that out. To everyone involved tonight, it's been a really good conversation. But yeah, we'll see you all very, very soon. And bye-bye.